I never thought life would take such a sharp, unexpected turn. Growing up, I was the kind of person who believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and built a solid foundation, everything would fall into place. And for a while, it seemed like that belief was paying off. I had a career I was proud of, a cozy house that felt like home, and a family that made every day feel like a blessing. Sarah and I had created a life filled with laughter, love, and the kind of small, beautiful moments that you don't realize you'll miss until they're gone. But as I've learned, even the most perfect-looking lives can have cracks hidden beneath the surface. Just a week ago, I would have said my life was nearly perfect. A solid job, a comfortable home, a beautiful, loving wife, and 3 incredible kids. But that illusion shattered during a routine drive to the park with my youngest 19-month-old Cindy, strapped into her car seat. Cindy had recently started talking, and while I'd experienced this with her older siblings, knowing she was likely our last made each milestone feel even more special. As we drove, we passed a kindergarten, and out of nowhere, Cindy identified it. She couldn't read, and we'd never pointed it out before. The only explanation I could come up with was that she had been there before, more than once. This unsettled me. My wife, Sarah, a stay-at-home mom, had never mentioned taking Cindy to daycare. We'd agreed to wait until she turned 2. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off, so I turned the car around and pulled into the daycare's parking lot. Inside, the receptionist greeted Cindy like she was a regular, mentioning she usually came on Wednesdays. My mind raced, but I managed to keep the conversation light before quickly heading back to the car. The drive home felt surreal. Sarah and I had been married for 10 years, and I believed we were as solid as couples get. The idea that she was hiding something gnawed at me, but I tried to push it aside, hoping for a reasonable explanation. As luck would have it, Sarah was on her annual cruise with her aunt, completely out of reach until Saturday. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 10, and shared everything, or so I thought. We'd traveled the world together before settling down and having kids. James came first, followed by Jenny, and finally Cindy, after Sarah convinced me to expand our family beyond the 2 children we initially planned. Sarah had always embraced motherhood, staying home with the kids while I worked as a designer. We had minor issues, me forgetting to put clothes in the laundry basket, her clogging the sink with hair, but nothing serious. Our only significant disagreements had been over small things, like the time she dyed James's hair red for St. Patrick's Day without asking me, or her recent push to send Cindy to daycare on Wednesdays, which I resisted. After her mother passed away last year, Sarah suggested daycare to get a break during the week. I wasn't comfortable with the idea, but we compromised. Cindy would start when she turned 2. Yet here I was, discovering that Sarah had been taking Cindy to daycare anyway, without telling me. This wasn't the first time Sarah had wanted more freedom. After Cindy's first birthday, she hinted at having a 4th child, even though we'd agreed on 2 and stretched to 3. She couldn't give me a clear reason why she'd changed her mind, and eventually the topic faded. Driving home, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. For years, Sarah had 6 free hours every Wednesday. At first, it was when James stayed with her mom, and now with Cindy at daycare. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but doubt had already taken root, and with Sarah unreachable until the weekend, all I could do was sit with that growing unease, questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together. When the kids were born, Sarah adjusted her annual trips around them. She'd leave frozen breast milk or jars of formula, and Cindy's recent weaning lined up with her latest getaway. I'd never met Sarah's aunt, only spoken to her briefly on the phone. But Sarah deserved those breaks, and I enjoyed taking a week off work to be with the kids. We had our routines. I played housekeeper, did school runs, and cooked dinner. I didn't mind giving up one of my vacation weeks, especially since Sarah always came back refreshed. And, well, let's just say it benefited us both. This time, Sarah claimed she and her aunt were off the coast of Antarctica, completely out of phone range. That made sense, until something felt off. Once you catch someone in a lie, everything else starts to feel suspicious. How did I really know she was on that cruise? Because of the photos she showed and the stories she told? That used to be enough. But suddenly, it wasn't. I remembered she'd called her aunt from our home phone a week ago. I found the number in the call history and dialed it without thinking. It rang several times before I realized it was probably the middle of the night in England. Just as I was about to hang up, the voicemail kicked in. It said her aunt and someone named Pete were on a cruise off Antarctica and would be reachable after May 3rd. That should have cleared things up, but it didn't. Who was Pete? And if her aunt was back on May 3rd, why wasn't Sarah returning until the 6th? The doubts grew. I checked our photo albums from her previous trips. They were filled with pictures of her aunt, on beaches, at dinners, in front of cruise ships. But Sarah wasn't in a single one. Not last year, not the year before. I'd never noticed before because I'd never had a reason to look. I decided to dig deeper. Sarah usually left her car in the long-term airport parking when she flew out late to meet her aunt. I pulled up her credit card statements, expecting to see the usual $85 parking fee. But there was nothing. Not for this trip, not for previous ones. Even stranger, during all her trips there were no charges at all, not even for a coffee or snack. I knew her aunt covered most expenses, but not a single small purchase. By now, suspicion had taken hold. I needed answers. I called my sister to watch Cindy and drove to the airport to look for Sarah's car. I combed through the parking lot row by row, but her car wasn't there. So where was she? On the drive home, my mind spiraled with worst-case scenarios. Was this heading toward divorce? Should I get legal advice? I had no lawyer friends, which now seemed like a huge oversight. Back home, desperate, I searched the house from top to bottom. Sarah loved this house. She'd worked closely with the architect and oversaw construction. It was 3 stories with a semi-basement where her sewing room and storage space were. The sewing room was her personal space, so I started there. But after combing through every drawer, even checking for hidden compartments, I found nothing unusual. I checked the rest of the house, but there was nothing out of place. No clues on the computer, no hidden documents, nothing to explain where she was or why she'd lied about daycare. The next day, after dropping off the kids, I went back to Cindy's daycare. The staff confirmed she'd been attending for the past 7 months, usually picked up around 2:30. Sarah had been lying to me for months. Back home, I resumed my search, focusing again on the basement. I moved boxes, checked shelves, even shifted the workbench, looking for hidden spaces. Nothing. Frustrated, I accidentally pricked my finger on a pincushion. In a fit of anger, I threw it, hitting the light bulb and plunging the room into darkness. Sitting there in the dim light from the stairwell, I noticed a faint beam of light crossing the room, landing on my hand. I followed it to a small hole in the wood paneling near the sewing table. Curious, I turned off the basement lights, and the beam disappeared. Something was behind that wall. I rushed upstairs, grabbed a new bulb, and replaced the broken one. Light filled the room again as I stared at that hole, wondering what I was about to uncover. For 10 minutes, I pushed, pulled, and probed every inch of that wall, searching for a hidden door. Nothing budged, and frustration built fast. I was seconds away from grabbing my tools to tear the wall apart when a memory flashed, one of Sarah's and my favorite movies. In it, a girl finds a secret passage by sticking her finger into a small hole in the wall. I stared at the hole in front of me. Without thinking, I moved closer and slid my finger in. I felt a small obstruction. Turning it clockwise, I heard a faint click. Across the room, one of the wooden panels shifted slightly open. My heart pounded. We designed and built this house. Only a few people could know about a hidden room. The architect, the builders, and Sarah. She was the only one with a reason to create a secret space. I braced myself for whatever truth lay behind that panel. When I pulled the door open, a light strip flicked on, illuminating a narrow space. The secret room's light was connected to the sewing room switch, meaning I'd only discovered it because I had accidentally broken the bulb outside. I wondered if this was Sarah's oversight or the electrician's mistake. Either way, I couldn't shake the dread creeping in. I knew deep down that whatever was in here would change everything. Inside, the space was shallow but organized. Clothes hung on a steel rod, sleek, revealing outfits I'd never seen Sarah wear. Beneath them, a small dresser stuffed with lingerie that looked like it belonged in someone else's life. Nearby, rows of high heels lined the floor. On one side, the room ended with a wooden wall, but on the other, a steel surface hinted at more. I found a gap between the steel and the wall. It wasn't just a wall, it was a door. Unlocking it revealed a massive fireproof safe, the kind that could only have been installed before the house was finished. How had I missed this during construction? I tried the safe's handle, expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it turned easily. Sarah must have been confident I'd never find it, or maybe she didn't think I'd ever question her at all. Inside the safe, steel shelves lined the top 2/3, while the bottom held a large metal box. The first thing I noticed was a glossy cruise brochure featuring an Antarctic ice shelf. Beneath it were similar brochures for Alaska, the West Indies, all the places Sarah claimed to have visited with her aunt. It became clear these were props, the materials for the stories she'd spun. The shelves were packed with documents, magazines, and non-commercial DVDs, each labeled with initials and dates. The top DVD read "Acknowledge, August 4th, 2016. That was about 20 months ago. On the bottom shelf sat an open wooden tray, glittering with jewelry. Expensive pieces, tossed carelessly as if they were worthless. But two satin ring boxes stood out, carefully placed. One held a large, flawless diamond. The other contained two simple rings, my wife's engagement ring and wedding band, the ones I had given her. Seeing them there felt like a punch to the gut. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by the realization. Sarah wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Wherever she wasn't presenting herself as married. I pulled myself together just enough to respond to my phone's alarm. It was time to pick up the kids. I pushed down the grief, collected James and Jenny, then went to my sister Carrie's for dinner. While the kids played, I told Carrie and her husband everything. They were shocked, unwilling to believe Sarah could be anything other than the woman we all knew. But they agreed we needed to dig deeper into those documents if I wanted real answers. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed and Cindy was asleep, I returned to the basement with the baby monitor. But instead of starting with the papers, I focused on the metal box at the bottom of the safe. It was heavy, far heavier than I expected. When I finally pried it open, I froze. Inside were gold bars, 11 of them. Some small, others larger, but all unmistakably valuable. Years ago, Sarah had convinced me to buy a single 100G gold bar as an investment. It was still in the bank. But this was over $1 million worth of gold. I struggled to process what I was seeing. Where had Sarah gotten this gold? I tried to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. My eyes drifted to the provocative clothes hanging nearby, and a sickening thought took hold. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I reached for one of the labeled magazines. It wasn't a magazine at all. It was an accounting ledger, written in shorthand. The first page listed a balance carried over from the previous year. The entries tracked amounts in both dollars and gold ounces. The far right column showed the total value, over $1.6 million. It was clear this wasn't just about money. It was about a life Sarah had kept hidden from me, a life I was only beginning to uncover. On the last Tuesday of January, I flipped through the ledger to February. There were 3 cash deposits of $1,500, all on Wednesdays. We'd been on vacation most of January, returning just before the school year started in early February. But by March, the pattern continued. 3 more $1,500 deposits. April followed suit with 3 standard deposits and a sudden $20,000 deposit immediately withdrawn the next day. The rest of the ledger was blank. Tucked inside the back cover were 3 printed pages of real estate listings, but I barely skimmed them. I grabbed the journal from the previous year and flipped through it, stopping at 2 debits in 1 month. The first was $78.53, labeled PTRL, which I guessed was gas. The second, VS 125 Ling, was a mystery. Glued between the pages were delivery receipts for gold bars. Each month showed cash deposits, mostly in sets of 3, while the gold ounces increased. Curious, I checked March of the previous year. 2 $1,500 deposits and another $20,000 one marked West Indies. That was the supposed cruise destination. In the 2016 journal, I found another $20,000 deposit labeled Greece, that year's trip. Sarah had come back with vivid stories and even some Greek phrases. If she'd never actually been there, the depth of her lies was staggering. Who was this woman? Did I even know her? I pushed the thoughts aside, trying to stay objective. Instead of going through every journal, I reached for the oldest one, from 2003, the year before we met. This one had more frequent entries, but the amounts were smaller. The first was for $200, rising to $600 within a few pages. Each loan had a signature beside it, about 4 or 5 different ones. Deeper into the journal, I found 3 large $10,000 entries. Confused, I shifted to the envelopes. The first was a standard business envelope, but its contents left me reeling. Registration papers for a Ferrari. It was registered to Sarah less than 2 years ago. A car worth at least $500,000. Where was it? A random memory surfaced. Last year, I'd stopped at a red light next to a red Ferrari convertible. I admired the car, not the blonde woman driving it, even though she looked to be around my age. An older man sat beside her, his hand resting casually on her bare leg. The driver glanced my way, then quickly looked away. The light turned green, but the Ferrari lingered before turning off a couple of blocks later. Could that have been Sarah? We definitely didn't have a Ferrari parked at home. Where was she keeping it? Maybe she drove it once a week, on Wednesdays, disguised in a wig, scarf, and oversized sunglasses. The next envelope was thick and heavy, filled with cash. I set it aside, uninterested. Underneath was a brochure for luxury apartments overlooking the river, units starting at $750,000. Sarah and I had talked about these apartments when they were first announced. They weren't selling well because of the steep price. We could have afforded one eventually, but Sarah was content with our life. Or so I thought. So why was the brochure hidden here? Back in the closet, away from the sewing room's bright light, I spotted a folded piece of paper on the floor, a blank title deed for one of the apartments. Sarah's maiden name was written at the bottom. Where the official stamp should have been was a crude sketch of one. Next to it, in the same messy handwriting, was a note. You know what you have to do to get the real one. I had no idea what that meant, but Sarah might have. The next envelope held an appraisal for a large diamond ring, valued at $132,000. I opened the velvet box from the safe again. There it was, a 5-carat diamond, brilliant and flawless. I'd suspected it was real when I first saw it, but realizing its worth hit me hard. The appraisal was dated July 2014, when Jenny was just a baby. Did that timing mean anything? I couldn't be sure. All that remained were the DVDs, Sarah's last chance at innocence. There were 6 discs, 3 with different initials and dated shortly after our engagement. The other 3 were labeled Acknowledge, one from 3 months before our wedding, another from 7 years later, and the last from just under 2 years ago. I stared at the DVDs, debating whether to watch them now. Exhaustion from a sleepless night weighed on me, and I knew whatever was on those discs would haunt me for a long time. I still had the kids to care for. So I texted my sister, asking if she could watch Cindy the next day, and went to bed, hoping for rest, but knowing sleep wouldn't come easy. If Sarah's only crime was robbing me of this peace, it was already unforgivable. The next morning, after dropping off the kids and leaving Cindy with my sister, I returned home. At 8:05 a.m., I slid the first DVD into the player. The label read SJ, September 20th, 2005, the month I proposed to Sarah. I wasn't sure if that was significant, but my heart was pounding. Sarah's voice filled the room. I turned to the TV and sank into the couch, my worst fears confirmed, not just by what I saw, but by what I heard. She was talking to a man named Steve. They were discussing a twisted role play where Sarah would pretend to be his wife and let another man seduce her. Their conversation was casual, rehearsed, as if this wasn't the first time. Steve handed Sarah a bag with his wife's clothes. Sarah undressed without hesitation, slipping into dainty white lingerie and a sundress. She styled her hair the way Steve's wife wore hers. They joked about how Sarah looked just like his wife, but more mischievous, the version who would do what the real one wouldn't. Steve admitted he was excited to watch. I stared at the screen in disbelief. It was Sarah, but not the woman I knew. Her mannerisms, her words, the way she moved. It was her, yet completely foreign. I didn't recognize this version of my wife, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know the rest. It was a hotel room, small with a kitchenette in the corner, and a table set for dinner, an attempt to mimic home. But Sarah's voice, sharp and direct to the camera, cut through my observations. She spoke to Josie, Steve's wife, revealing everything. Steve wanted Josie to sleep with other men, but didn't have the courage to tell her, so he paid Sarah to act it out. For nearly 2 years, he'd made Sarah shower with Josie's soap, wear her clothes, even her used underwear, then pretend to be Josie while servicing strangers, clients, neighbors, even his boss. Hearing this twisted confession shattered me. I thought I was prepared to see Sarah with another man, but this wasn't just an affair. This was something darker. And then it clicked. The video wasn't just for Steve's pleasure. It was insurance. Blackmail in disguise. I paused the video and rushed to Sarah's sewing room, flipping through the 2005 ledgers, hunting for any transaction linked to SJ, Steve. There were a few deposits in September, but nothing after. No large unexplained sums, no clear sign of blackmail payments. She documented everything else meticulously, so why not this? Confused, I returned to the living room, forcing myself to watch the rest. Steve had brought in a man named Jimmy, pretending he was an old college friend. The scene played out like a twisted adult film from the 80s. Steve left the room, leaving Josie, Sarah, to seduce Jimmy. She played the part perfectly, feigning reluctance while Steve pressured her to give in. When it was over, Jimmy dressed and left without a word. Steve called Sarah his beautiful witch, praising her. Then he was on top of her, and they started again. I sat on the floor, stunned. It wasn't just what I saw, it was how convincing Sarah was in the role. She wasn't my wife in that video. She was someone else entirely. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, Sarah faced the camera, fully dressed, her tone icy. She left a message for Steve telling him to stay away, never contact her again, and act like they'd never met if they crossed paths. If he slipped up, she'd send the video to his wife. Her smile was cold, calculated, not the woman I thought I knew. I felt sick. This wasn't blackmail driven by desperation. It was control, power. She'd kept this part of her life hidden so well, and now it was unraveling. I stared at the remaining DVDs. I knew I had to get through them, even though I dreaded what I'd find. Rip the Band-Aid off, Mike, I told myself, trying to summon courage. I loaded the next DVD, labeled RG, October 18th, 2005. I didn't need to watch every second, I just needed the story. Then came HD, October 25th, 2005. Sarah had been busy that October. HD, Harold, was another man she manipulated, ending the tape with the same cold warning. By now it was clear, Sarah had been cutting ties before our wedding. But then there were the acknowledged DVDs, 3 of them. The first from June 2006, the second from 2013, and the last from 2016. Why was AK different? Why 3 videos? I hesitated before pressing play. AK stood for Artie, and when his face appeared on screen, I felt a jolt of recognition. I paused, studying his face, but the memory wouldn't come until I saw his profile. That was it. The man from the Ferrari, the one I'd seen with the blonde who looked suspiciously like Sarah in disguise. The first video confirmed it. They were in our old house, our bedroom. She brought him into our home, our sacred space. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady myself before moving to the next. The second video was dated August 2013. Sarah was pregnant with Jenny. How could she betray me like that while carrying our child? The gap between the videos puzzled me. Why such a long break? I braced for the final video. It was from 2016 when she was pregnant with Cindy. This time, the scene was in the guest room, now Cindy's room. She didn't defile our bed, but it didn't matter. What was left of my trust crumbled. Unlike the other videos, there was no message at the end. No threats. Why not? I had more questions than answers. Returning the DVDs to the secret closet, reality set in. I hadn't married the woman I thought I knew. I married a stranger. In a daze, I picked up the kids and went to my sister's for dinner. While the kids played, I whispered everything to her. She was as stunned as I was. We both knew Sarah had led a double life, but the depth of her deception was overwhelming. Sarah wasn't just cheating. She'd been a high-priced escort, catering to wealthy clients, men willing to pay for her beauty and submission. After we met, she slowly phased them out. But AK, Artie, remained. The gifts, the gold, the Ferrari, it all pointed back to him. My sister finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are you going to do? My first instinct was divorce. The betrayal was too deep, too long-standing. But beneath the anger, I felt something worse. Heartbreak. I didn't want to lose that fury because the alternative was unbearable sadness. Anger was easier to manage than grief. Thinking about modern divorce laws left me with a bitter realization. Sarah would likely keep her hidden fortune, live in my house, and have custody of the kids while I paid child support. She'd probably keep seeing her sugar daddy too. The idea of losing my children was unbearable. I had to find a way to prevent that. The only non-negotiable part of my plan was staying close to my kids, even if it meant living under the same roof with Sarah. But my sister Carrie snapped me back to reality. I assumed I had some control over how this would play out, but what if Sarah had her own plans? With her secret assets and shady contacts, would I even have a say in my future? Was I still part of hers? Or was she already preparing to cut me out completely? Carrie pointed out that maybe Sarah wasn't as untouchable as I thought. Even in today's world, luck and timing mattered. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as I felt. Whoever controlled the money controlled the situation. And now, I had some of that control. After dinner, I accepted Carrie's offer to stay over with the kids, giving me time to dig deeper into Sarah's secret life. Once the kids were asleep, We combed through her ledgers and notes. I debated calling Sarah's aunt in England to confirm she'd never spent those annual weeks with her. But in the end, we decided against it. Whether her aunt knew the truth or not didn't matter. Sarah would have already prepped her with stories and photos from her fake cruises. A confrontation would be more effective if it caught her off guard, just like I had been. We read through the ledgers late into the night. By 2008, the safe was empty. No more gold, jewelry, cash, or even the Ferrari title. I had hidden it all in waterproof containers buried under the compost pile in the backyard. I'd double-check in daylight, but for now, I had the upper hand. If things went south, I could use these resources to balance the scales legally. As we continued reading, it became clear. Sarah had a long list of clients before we got engaged, but after the wedding, it was just one, AK. Early ledger entries helped us match initials to the men in her blackmail videos. Each video, except the last with AK, ended with Sarah cutting ties and threatening exposure. She was smart, ensuring her past clients stayed out of her life. The first 3 videos didn't show recognizable locations, probably a deliberate choice to keep her living situation secret. But the 3 AK videos were all filmed in our house. Sarah wouldn't risk regularly meeting him there, but AK likely pressured her to, relishing the humiliation it brought me. How often did she give in? We could only guess. Her double life stretched on for years, charging $1,500 per Wednesday session, except during holidays, school breaks, or when AK was away. Once a year, she'd fake a trip to her aunt's and either stay with him or travel somewhere together. Those trips cost him $20,000. The ledgers were meticulous, even recording extravagant gifts, $100,000 after James was born, a diamond ring after Jenny, and the Ferrari during her pregnancy with Cindy. She logged everything, even cash withdrawals for lingerie, marked VS for Victoria's Secret. Whether it was to keep AK's interest or for herself, who knew? After a decade, even affairs needed spicing up. Her financial planning was impressive, if not for the deep betrayal behind it. A few entries were puzzling, though. Last month, there was a $20,000 withdrawal labeled HM, right after AK's payment. No clue what it meant. Was she blackmailed herself? Did she buy something? Nothing in her notes explained it. As I pondered, Carrie stared at photos of the kids, then turned to me with a question that had haunted me since the first AK video. Were the kids even mine? She pulled out old family albums, comparing childhood photos, looking for similarities. Thankfully, we both saw the family resemblance, but doubt lingered. I couldn't ignore it. I decided to get DNA and STD tests, just to be sure. With no other leads, we agreed to wait for Sarah's return and confront her. It was Thursday, and she wasn't due back until Sunday. I took Monday off work and arranged for Carrie to watch the kids. The rest was out of my hands. Before bed, I showed Carrie clips from an AK video. She thought he looked familiar, but couldn't place him. The rest of the week passed in a fog. The kids kept me grounded, their routines and questions anchoring me. But every time I looked at them, I felt torn. Part of them was Sarah. That made it hard to stay angry, but I wanted to be angry. Anger was easier than heartbreak. Sunday came and Sarah didn't show up. No call, no message. Monday passed with the same silence. Now frustration turned into anxiety. I filed a missing person report Monday afternoon, sticking to Sarah's official story, leaving out everything I knew. The cops barely hid their indifference. Just another runaway wife, they figured. Don't call us, we'll call you. I told the kids she was delayed and took the rest of the week off to wait. On Wednesday, the sound of screeching tires snapped me out of my daze. Carrie burst through the door, waving a newspaper. She flipped to page 5 and shoved it in my face. The headline read, "Local Recovery Millionaire Opens New Shelter for Violence Victims." But it wasn't the article that grabbed me. It was the photo. Arthur Kindred. I recognized him instantly from the most recent AK video with Sarah. Standing next to him was his wife, looking polished but distant, her face a mask of practiced disinterest. At first glance, she seemed much younger, but a closer look revealed the truth. Cosmetic surgery had simply slowed her aging. Arthur Kindred was loaded, the kind of rich where a Ferrari was pocket change. No wonder he looked familiar. He was known for avoiding the spotlight unless it suited him. That explained the car. But now I had a name, and that changed everything. With Arthur's name, I could find his address. But that left me in a tough spot. If I told the police, I'd have to reveal everything I knew about Sarah's affair. If Sarah was in trouble, I'd become the prime suspect. So I decided to handle it myself. After dropping off the kids with Carrie, I drove to Arthur's estate, a mansion that could pass for a small country. The gated entrance was tight, and there was no way I could see past the fence. While I sat there thinking, a silver Lexus pulled up to the gate. A woman stepped out to check the mailbox. I recognized her immediately, the carefully styled blonde hair from the newspaper photo. Cindy from the back seat spoke clearly, her little voice cutting through the silence. "Aunt Jean!" Rage consumed me when I realized Sarah had taken Cindy to the Kindred's mansion. The betrayal felt endless. I jumped into my car, crossed the street, and stopped behind Jean Kindred's Lexus. She turned pale but didn't move as I stormed out, demanding to know how she knew my daughter. Cindy, oblivious, waved at her. Jean, clearly rattled, told me to ask her husband before quickly escaping through the gate. Her expression lingered in my mind. Something wasn't adding up. She knew more than she let on, but without a solid plan, I drove home, frustrated. At home, Cindy confirmed she'd visited the mansion multiple times. The thought that Arthur might be her father gnawed at me. I picked up DNA test kits on the way home. The kids resembled me and Carrie, but I needed undeniable proof. Each discovery unraveled more of my life, and I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I didn't return to the mansion that weekend because that night, the news broke. Arthur Kindred's private jet had crashed in a neighboring state. No survivors. Relief, fear, and frustration collided in my chest. 2 bodies were recovered, both male. So where was Sarah? Was she alive? Dead? I hated that I wasn't sure which outcome I wanted. The next morning, to my shock, Jean Kindred pulled into my driveway. Why was she here now after avoiding me before? I had Carrie take the kids outside as Jean approached. I let her in, offering her water as she settled into the living room. She was composed, but carried an edge I couldn't quite read. Without wasting time, she suggested Arthur's death wasn't an accident. Explosives were found in the wreckage. Unofficial information, she claimed. She implied that I had motive, given the affair and the timing of my visit. I shot back, accusing her of having just as much reason to want Arthur dead. We danced around accusations, both probing for the upper hand. Eventually, we agreed to exchange information. Jean revealed Sarah started escorting during college due to financial troubles. She admitted to enjoying the control and money. Arthur became her client in 2003, and despite attempts to end things in 2006, he convinced her to continue. Over time, he grew obsessed with her having children, rewarding her after each birth, $100,000 after James, a diamond ring after Jenny, and a Ferrari when she was pregnant with Cindy. Hearing Jean casually mention my kids by name hit like a punch to the gut. She admitted Arthur was too vain to accept he couldn't have children, and by the time she discovered his perversions, she stayed for the lifestyle. Sarah had played both of us, manipulating Arthur for gifts while betraying me. The anger burned hot, but underneath it all was a growing fear. If Sarah wasn't dead, where was she? And if she was, how deep was I in this mess? The realization that Sarah had given me 3 children because an old man paid her to was almost unbearable. Children should be born from love, not greed. Jean Kindred confirmed that Arthur had offered to buy Sarah an apartment if she convinced me to have another child. I turned away, trying to hide my anger, but admitted I already knew. Jean seemed surprised by my tolerance. I was humiliated, sure, but at least I wasn't being manipulated by Arthur's twisted desires. She didn't deny her own part in it either, accepting a comfortable life in exchange for turning a blind eye to her husband's affairs. We both knew we were at a standstill. She thought I liquidated Arthur. I thought she did, and both of us had motives. Any investigation would drag both our names into the mud. She warned me to think about my children and the consequences of publicity. Jean admitted she hadn't loved Arthur in years, but insisted that didn't make her a murderer. I couldn't argue with her logic. She probably deserved her inheritance after putting up with him for so long. I laid out my terms. I'd stay quiet if she didn't try to pin Arthur's death on me, and if she told me what she knew about Sarah's disappearance. After a long pause, Jean revealed that Arthur had taken Sarah to Mexico on his yacht, Lyra, but returned alone. When she asked where Sarah was, Arthur claimed he left her in a bad place for a week. He said Sarah had tried to blackmail him with incriminating videos, and he wanted to scare her into compliance, maybe even pressure her into having another child. Arthur was on his way back to pick her up when his plane went down. The idea that Arthur had plans to involve me floored me. He didn't know me at all if he thought I'd quietly accept that. But Jean explained it was never about money for Arthur. Once he had enough wealth, it became about power. There was no greater power than seducing another man's wife, especially under his nose. Arthur believed he could buy my silence with $1 million and even convince me to agree to a 4th child. He thought everyone had a price. The idea made me sick. but I still didn't understand why Arthur had gone to such extremes when Sarah tried to leave. Jean hesitated, then admitted that, as twisted as it sounded, Arthur loved Sarah in his own perverse way. He even convinced himself the children were his. That was too much. I collapsed into a chair, struggling to process everything. It felt like something out of a bad movie. Mexico? Really? Jean added that Arthur hadn't planned to harm Sarah physically. He just wanted to scare her, show her what could happen if she didn't comply. But I knew how ruthless Arthur could be. And now, with him dead, Sarah was still out there, alone and vulnerable. Jean reminded me of our agreement. No press. I could only nod. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't find the words to respond. She left, her footsteps echoing through the house like nails in my coffin. Before her visit, I'd been angry, confused, hurt. Now I felt trapped in a purgatory of uncertainty. Jean had confirmed my worst fears, and I couldn't unlearn any of it. When the door closed, I lowered my head, realizing the full weight of what had happened. I could never forget Sarah's betrayal, her endless lies. I could never believe in her love again. Every moment we'd shared, every promise, every whispered word of affection. I'd question all of it for the rest of my life. The sound of my children's laughter drifted in from the backyard, pulling me back from my spiraling thoughts. No matter how I felt, they needed me. I had to stay strong for them. My grief and anger would have to wait. I tried to refocus, wondering why Jean had come to me if she really thought I was Arthur's butcher. If she'd orchestrated his murder, visiting me was a risk. Was she trying to cover her tracks? Was she hiding more than just murder? And what about Sarah? Could I even get her out of Mexico when I didn't know where Arthur had left her? And if I managed to bring her home, then what? A dark thought crept into my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it lingered. Did I even want to save Sarah? Before I could push aside the dark thoughts, Carrie and the kids came bursting into the house, their arrival forcing me to shelve any discussion about Jean Kindred's visit. Without speaking about it, we threw ourselves into the usual evening routine, bathing the kids and preparing dinner. But Jean's words kept replaying in my mind, tangled with memories of Sarah. Every recollection now felt tarnished, intruding on my time with the children in a way I despised. Later, after the kids were finally settled, Carrie collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She commented on how hard it had been to get Cindy to calm down, then turned her attention to me, asking about Jean's visit. I handed her a glass of wine, feeling unsure of where to begin, but I recounted the conversation as best as I could, stumbling slightly when I reached the part about Sarah's whereabouts. Carrie listened carefully, then sighed, reflecting on Jean's assurance that Sarah wasn't being forced into anything. Still, the situation left her unsettled, and she questioned what I was planning to do. I admitted I didn't have answers. Not about rescuing Sarah, not about how to even begin. Trying to ground the conversation, Carrie suggested setting aside any rescue plans for the moment and asked what I intended to do if Sarah returned. Again, I had no clear answer. She reminded me that I needed to start making decisions, to come up with some kind of plan. I agreed, but admitted I was struggling to process everything. Reconciling the Sarah I'd loved for 12 years with the Sarah of the ledgers, the Ferrari, and the secret room felt impossible. One moment, I could picture her in yoga pants making pancakes on a Sunday morning, and the next, I saw her in one of those expensive dresses, and it felt like I was thinking about two different people. Carrie admitted that Sarah's double life unsettled her too, but suggested we go back to basics and weigh the pros and cons. I nodded, knowing it was the only logical thing to do. We listed everything out, and by the end, the reasons for divorce seemed weak compared to the emotional cost of splitting up. Sure, there were massive issues like betrayal and trust, but I had to acknowledge that pride and ego played a role too. On the other hand, staying together meant keeping my assets and avoiding alimony and child support. But those material things didn't compare to the thought of losing daily contact with my kids. The idea of only seeing them on weekends felt unbearable. I loved reading them bedtime stories, tucking them in, and just being there for the everyday moments. Even if I exposed Sarah's secret life, the court might still grant her custody. I admitted to Carrie that I couldn't believe what I was about to say. She encouraged me to just get it out. I asked if she'd ever thought about not rescuing Sarah. Her reaction shocked me. She was usually the embodiment of kindness, but she reminded me that Sarah had cheated on me from the very beginning, lied to me every day of our relationship. She pointed out that, based on divorce laws, if Sarah didn't come back within 2 years, I could annul the marriage. or at least file for abandonment, which might protect me from losing everything and help maintain custody of the kids. Leaving Sarah in Mexico, she argued, wasn't worse than what Sarah had done to me all these years. She even suggested that I could ask Jean Kindred to ensure Sarah wasn't harmed. In her mind, that might be better for the kids than a messy divorce. I sipped my wine, mulling over Carrie's words. Even with the full knowledge of Sarah's betrayal, and even though Carrie's logic made sense, I wasn't sure I could do it. Could I leave Sarah in Mexico? The night dragged on, and as I lay in bed, staring at the glowing green numbers on the clock, I couldn't shake Carrie's words from my mind. She cheated from the beginning. Have you thought about not saving her? Would it be worse for the kids than divorce? Sarah had broken me. She had inflicted wounds so deep, I wasn't sure I'd ever fully heal. I questioned every moment of the past 12 years. The Sarah from the secret room was a stranger to me, but I still loved the Sarah who had cried with joy when our children were born. The Sarah who I thought had loved me back. I tried to make sense of why she'd continued her double life even after we were engaged, after we were married. I could almost understand her doing it to cope with financial troubles in college, even if I didn't agree with her choices. But after our commitment, I couldn't fathom it. Those two versions of Sarah clashed in my mind, the one in yoga pants making pancakes and the one driving a Ferrari in a blonde wig, the Sarah in her favorite white dress and the one wrapped in an expensive gown from the secret room. Which one was the real Sarah? Would I ever know? How could I believe anything she said again? How could I tell when she was being genuine and when she was performing? One thing I was sure of, whatever her reasons for having our children, she loved them. That wasn't something she could fake. But the uncertainty about who my wife truly was, what her real intentions were, and where I, and our children, fit into her life tormented me. I felt like there had to be a way to find out. Something nagged at me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I knew the answer was in that secret room. Without a second thought, I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floorboards chilling my feet. Grabbing the baby monitor, I headed straight for Sarah's sewing room. I started rifling through the envelopes and loose documents, unsure of what exactly I was searching for, but convinced I'd recognize it when I found it. Moving on to the notebooks, I picked up the most recent one. In my haste, I accidentally dropped a few loose pages tucked in the back. I almost ignored them, but something made me glance down. One page stood out immediately, a flyer that read, "For sale, designs for life." A graphics studio downtown was up for sale. My mind began racing. Sarah had planned to use part of her hidden fortune to buy me my own design studio. She had been continuing her secret life, selling herself, not for selfish reasons, but for us, for me. I couldn't condone what she'd done, but realizing she had done it for our family hit me hard. I collapsed to my knees, my eyes stinging with tears. I wasn't just part of Sarah's past, I was part of her future. She loved me. A wave of relief and love surged through me, but Jean Kindred's words echoed in my mind. Sarah had tried to blackmail Arthur to end their relationship. She wanted out. She must have believed she'd saved enough for us to live the life we dreamed of. How she planned to explain the sudden influx of money was unclear, maybe an inheritance or some lottery win. Whatever her story would have been, her goal was to leave that life behind. Whether our marriage could survive remained a massive question mark. Could I ever erase the images of her with other men from my mind? Could I trust her again, knowing how masterfully she had deceived me for years? But no matter how deeply she betrayed me, she didn't deserve the nightmare she was living now. I had to get her out of that brothel. I prayed Jean Kindred knew where Arthur had left Sarah. Months passed, and eventually, I stood in court hearing the judge's ruling. The case of Shaw v. Shaw ended in my favor. The judge granted a dissolution of marriage on the grounds of abandonment. I retained full custody of all 3 children and 100% of our marital assets. The judge's words faded into the background as the reality of it all sank in. It was over. I was no longer married to Sarah. Legally, I was free, but there was no sense of victory, no satisfaction. Only a hollow sadness lingered. I glanced over my shoulder at Carrie, who gave me an encouraging smile. That night, after the kids were safely asleep, I poured myself a glass of port and sat out on the veranda. It was a beautiful evening, but I barely noticed. My mind was trapped in the past, spinning over the same questions that had haunted me for the last 2 years. Did I make the right choice? Was there even a real alternative? And what kind of life had I condemned Sarah to? The memory of that night, the night I finally understood Sarah's motives, still haunted me. I had gone to bed feeling relieved, believing I had figured everything out. But I woke up to the harsh light of a flashlight shining directly in my face. The scene played on repeat in my mind. A man, dressed in black with his face hidden by a balaclava, sat at the edge of my bed. He pointed a Colt at me, the silencer fitted to the barrel glinting faintly in the dark. His casual greeting, completely at odds with the tool aimed at me, left me frozen in shock. In that moment, I was convinced Jean Kindred had decided to tie up loose ends, eliminating me just like her husband and Sarah. The thought made me break into a cold sweat. Expecting to die, my first instinct was to beg for my children's lives. I pleaded with him, desperate to protect them. But the man clarified. He wasn't there to liquidate me or my kids, at least not yet. He even addressed me casually, asking if he could call me Mike. I nodded, slowly sitting up, trying to process what was happening. Then he asked the question that shook me to the core. Where was my hot little wife? He claimed they were supposed to meet that day, and he seemed frustrated that Sarah had missed their appointment. He hoped she wasn't trying to back out of a deal. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He adjusted his grip on the Colt, subtly shifting its angle as if to remind me of its presence. I told him the truth. I didn't know where Sarah was. She disappeared over a week ago, and I'd even filed a police report. That didn't satisfy him. He explained that Sarah owed him money, $20,000 to be exact. They had a business arrangement, half paid up front, half due upon completion. Apparently, the job was done, and he wanted his payment. My mind reeled. Sarah owed money? What kind of business deal was this? As I asked questions, the pieces started falling into place. He made it clear that if I couldn't get the money from Sarah, I'd have to pay it myself. He leaned in, running the cold metal of the Colt along my cheek, and made me repeat his demand. $20,000 by 2 p.m. the next day. Before leaving, he delivered one final, chilling message. He had checked on my kids before waking me up. The implication was clear. If I didn't pay, they wouldn't be safe. Then, as casually as if he were leaving a friend's house, he walked out the door, leaving me in stunned silence, wondering how much deeper Sarah's secrets went. I shot out of bed as his final words echoed in my mind, his quiet, sinister laughter still lingering. As he descended the stairs, I rushed to check on the kids, one by one, relief flooding through me when I found them sleeping peacefully, untouched. But as the shock wore off, my body betrayed me. I started shaking uncontrollably. My legs felt like jelly as I stumbled into the living room trying to process his words, but my mind refused to cooperate. Then it hit me. The mysterious $20,000 entry in Sarah's ledger suddenly made horrifying sense. Half the payment had been made up front, and now the rest was due. The HM scribbled beside it wasn't some cryptic code. It stood for Hitman. The job? Liquidating Arthur Kindred. Sarah had arranged for someone to take drastic action against him. My stomach turned. I thought back to the strange expressions I'd seen on Jean Kindred's face. Confusion, fear, a strange mix I hadn't been able to interpret. Now it was all crystal clear. Jean hadn't orchestrated her husband's murder. It was Sarah. I shook my head in denial, refusing to believe it. Despite her lies, her betrayal, and everything I'd uncovered, I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that Sarah was capable of murder. But the evidence was undeniable. The hitman's words haunted me. They had a business arrangement, and now he wanted his payment. What pushes someone to commit murder? I could understand a desperate parent protecting their family, but this? Arthur had been in Sarah's life for over a decade. He'd been generous with her. They were intimate, for God's sake. Why liquidate him? The only explanation was what Jean had hinted at. Sarah had tried to end things, and Arthur wouldn't let her go. But did that justify liquidating him? Not in my eyes. He wasn't a threat to me or the kids, only to Sarah's secret life. She had orchestrated a serious crime to protect her double life. That was monstrous. And if she could do that to Arthur, could she apply the same cold logic to me? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I dropped the kids at school and left Cindy with Carrie, not breathing a word about what had happened. There'd be time for that later. I pulled cash from Sarah's secret stash to prepare an envelope for the hitman. The irony wasn't lost on me. Arthur Kindred had essentially paid for his own death. And Sarah, well, she was rotting in a Mexican brothel because her hitman had liquidated Arthur right when he was about to free her. She'd trapped herself. Not Arthur, not me. It was her doing. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. There he was again. "Hello, Mike," he greeted with unsettling friendliness, his profession making his casual tone even more disturbing. I held the envelope in my hand, but hesitated, my heart pounding. The question that had plagued me all night tumbled out. "How do I know you won't come back after I pay you?" He looked surprised, then feigned hurt before flashing a fake smile. I'm a professional. Sarah and I had an agreement. Once you hand over that envelope, we're done. I nodded and gave him the money, praying I wasn't making a colossal mistake. How could I trust a butcher's word? I watched him walk away, every fiber of him radiating danger. His parting words from the night before replayed in my mind. Good kids, real cuties. I checked on them before I woke you up. I knew in my gut that if someone paid him enough, he wouldn't hesitate to liquidate a child. And Sarah, my wife, had brought this man into our lives, into my children's lives. Sweet, innocent, defenseless children. That knowledge dwarfed all her other betrayals. The lies, the cheating, the years of deception, they were nothing compared to the fact that she had endangered our kids. That was unforgivable. In that moment, I knew my course of action. My job as a father was to protect my children, even if that meant protecting them from their own mother. Sarah had committed a crime that would have landed her in prison for life if she'd been caught. Instead, fate had her locked away in Mexico for the foreseeable future. Karma had done its job. I took a deep breath, sipping my port as I returned to the present. I loved my kids more than anything, and my priority was keeping them safe. Leaving Sarah in Mexico wasn't just a decision, it was a necessity. It would take time to come to terms with it, but it was the price of being a father. Jean Kindred couldn't escape the fallout from Arthur's murder. The police conducted a thorough investigation. Though they never charged her, the scandal ruined her socially. She was ostracized, her name smeared in the circles she'd once thrived in. She never remarried, had no children, and died wealthy but alone, unable to enjoy the riches she'd fought so hard to protect. True to her word, she never implicated me. She feared bad publicity more than a police investigation. After 2 years, the authorities concluded that Arthur Kindred had been liquidated by Mexico's Cortez cartel, targeting him for running shelters that provided refuge to the wives of cartel members. I sold the house Sarah and I had shared. The couple who bought it were thrilled to discover the secret room. I even showed them how to open it. Then I moved closer to Carrie, buying a house with a detached garage and an apartment above it, which I converted into my graphic design studio. Using some of Sarah's $1.6 million stash, I had the luxury of building my business from the ground up while hiring a full-time housekeeper and nanny for James, Jenny, and Cindy. Over time, Mrs. Knowles became like a grandmother to them. 5 years after Sarah's disappearance, I met Diana, a single mother. Our relationship had its challenges. We both carried emotional baggage. But eventually, we found love, peace, and lasting happiness together. Ironically, I ended up with 4 kids. Diana's son, Ryan, a year younger than Jamie, eventually fell in love with Cindy when he returned home from college and realized she'd grown into an incredible young woman. But that's a story for another time. And in case you're wondering, DNA tests confirmed I was the biological father of all 3 of my children. As for the hitman, being the professional he claimed to be, he never bothered us again. Hey everyone, where are you watching from? Write your city in the comments. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever dealt with a disloyal woman? Maybe a friend, a girlfriend, or even a wife? If yes, share your story in the comments. Let's see how many people have faced this situation. And now let's get to today's story. Crouched on his hands and knees, Ronnie Jackson was deep into the tedious task of laying 4 by 4-inch ceramic tiles across a 10 by 12-foot kitchen floor. Each tile had to be meticulously placed, with adhesive carefully applied before pressing it into position. As he set another piece in line with the previous one, he gave a small, satisfied nod. A minor misalignment, just a couple of millimeters, could throw off the whole layout, and since Eccles renovation and remodeling guaranteed perfect results, Ronnie made sure every tile was precisely positioned before moving forward. Just as he reached the end of the row, his phone rang. It was his wife, Charlotte, calling the company line. He answered. "Ronnie, it's me," she said, her tone clipped and impatient. "Yeah," he muttered, already reaching for another tile to keep working. There had been a time when she greeted him with warmth, maybe even a playful, "Hey, honey," but those days felt like a distant memory. "When are you going to be done?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. Ronnie glanced at his progress. He had covered nearly 8 feet of the floor so far. "I'm at Pritchard's place," he said. "I'd say another 3 hours, give or take." "Fine," Charlotte snapped, then hung up without another word. Ronnie sighed. He felt the urge to rush through the rest of the job, but experience told him that cutting corners would only lead to problems. So he forced himself to stay focused, carefully placing each tile while his mind drifted elsewhere, specifically to the woman he had been married to for almost 22 years. He first met Charlotte Eccles on his second day working for her father's company. She had walked into John Eccles' office, nervously explaining why she hadn't performed well in high school. She was a chubby brunette with thick, wavy hair and a face dotted with acne. Ronnie barely spared her a glance before returning his attention to the tools he was organizing in the company shed. "That's my daughter," John Eccles growled, narrowing his eyes at Ronnie. "You hear me? My daughter?" "Yes, sir," Ronnie replied, resisting the urge to shrug. It didn't take long for Charlotte to pick up on her father's disapproval. Maybe that's why she made a habit of flashing Ronnie flirtatious smiles and greeting him every time they crossed paths. He always responded politely but never encouraged her advances. "I warned you," John barked one afternoon. "Leave my daughter alone, got it?" "I'm not chasing after her," Ronnie said honestly. At 21, he saw 17-year-old Charlotte as nothing more than a pesky teenager. She was overweight, awkward, and constantly fidgeting. To him, she was just an annoyance. One evening, as Ronnie and another worker unloaded supplies after a long day, Charlotte approached him. "Hey, Ronnie," she purred. "Yeah," he grunted, struggling to open a bag of quick-dry cement. "I turn 18 this Saturday," she announced, leaning forward slightly. "Good for you," Ronnie said flatly. "Happy birthday." His co-worker smirked. Charlotte wasn't deterred. "So what are you getting me for my birthday?" she asked, her voice teasing. Ronnie sighed. "Close your eyes," he said. She did. "What do you see?" he asked, hoisting the cement bag into the truck. Nothing," she said hesitantly. "Exactly, that's my gift. Happy birthday," he said before walking away. But Charlotte's mother, Lois Eccles, had other plans. She insisted that Ronnie be invited to Charlotte's birthday party and made sure her husband extended the invitation. Feeling obligated, Ronnie bought a card from a local pharmacy and picked up a silver bracelet from a pawn shop for $20. Lois also managed to rope him into taking Charlotte to prom. He begrudgingly agreed, cringing when he saw her in a tight sleeveless dress. Still, he was polite. He posed for photos, danced with her, and even kissed her goodnight before taking her home. A few days later, John Eccles confronted him again. "She's heartbroken because you didn't call her," John growled. Ronnie bit back his frustration. He didn't want to get involved, but he called Charlotte anyway and asked her out. One date turned into another. By the fifth, she gave him her pureness. 5 months after they got married, Tracy Lois Jackson was born. And for the next decade, Ronnie found himself stuck with the hardest, most grueling jobs at Eccles Renovation and Remodeling. He was convinced that John Eccles deliberately sought out the most backbreaking projects just so he could dump them on his son-in-law. For the first 16 years of their marriage, Charlotte had been a decent wife. She made an effort to understand Ronnie's preferences, learned to cook his favorite meals, and even kept quiet during Broncos games on Sundays. She struggled with her weight, shedding pounds only to gain them back, sometimes more than before. Her acne improved slightly, but the scars never fully faded, though makeup helped. When their daughter Tracy started school, Charlotte took a job at the Garland County Public Library. The salary was meager, but the benefits, health and dental insurance, were worth it. Then, shortly after their 16th anniversary, Charlotte's cousin Darlene moved back to Dolans, Utah, dragging along yet another husband, either her third or fourth. Darlene was loud, crass, and always stirring up trouble. Her husband, Gary, wasn't any better, an obnoxious Dallas Cowboys fan, of all things. Unfortunately, Charlotte quickly adopted her cousin's abrasive attitude. She became more outspoken, more critical, and less attentive to her home life. Cooking became a rarity, house chores were neglected, and most evenings, she was out with Darlene and Gary instead of home. Ronnie didn't mind cooking for himself. He knew his way around the kitchen, and he didn't complain about washing a few dishes. But what started as an occasional break from household duties soon became the norm. Even Tracy learned to clean, cook, and sew buttons back onto her school uniform. Yet somehow she seemed to blame Ronnie for her mother's absence rather than Charlotte herself. Back in Pritchard's kitchen, Ronnie checked the time. 3 hours had passed since Charlotte's call. With the last tile laid at the threshold between the kitchen and living room, he slowly straightened up, groaning as his stiff joints protested. "Man, I'm getting too old for this," he muttered, gathering his tools and the few extra tiles left over. After finishing up at the Pritchard house, Ronnie pulled out his phone and dialed John Eccles. Even now, after all these years, the sound of John's garbled speech made Ronnie wince. The man had been larger than life before the stroke nearly took him down, and his recovery had been painfully slow. The health crisis had come on suddenly, just minutes after his wife Lois revealed she had chest cancer. Despite enduring a double mastectomy and radiation therapy, Lois had still taken on the burden of caring for her husband while fighting for her own life. John and Lois's sons, Dennis, Brian, and Paul, did their best to help where they could. Ronnie pitched in whenever necessary, and Charlotte, the only daughter, had been her mother's constant support. It was Charlotte who drove Lois to her appointments at Fairway Hospital, holding her hand through the worst of the pain. In the end, the battle was too much. Lois lost. And when she did, John Eccles seemed to lose his will to live along with her. But for whatever reason, end didn't come for him. Instead, day after day, he was wheeled into the company office on a gurney, as if sheer routine might keep him tethered to the world. Every afternoon, he sat at his desk, cursing his uncooperative left hand as he struggled to type on his keyboard. When the day ended, one of his sons would drive him home. "Yes, sir, I just wrapped up Pritchard's job. It's done," Ronnie said into the phone, listening as John grunted and wheezed in response. When Ronnie got home, the smell of dinner hit him immediately. Pork chops, mashed potatoes, and French-cut green beans. One of his favorites. He inhaled deeply, savoring it. After John's stroke, Charlotte had forced the family onto a strict heart-healthy diet, which had helped her drop 40 pounds, though she still carried more weight than she wanted. Ronnie often joked that their daughter, Tracy, had chosen to attend Brigham Young University just to escape the bland, low-sodium meals. Tracy never denied it. Ronnie leaned in to kiss Charlotte as she moved between the stove and the counter, but she waved him off, wrinkling her nose. He got the message. Stripping off his sweaty clothes, he tossed them in the hamper and headed for the shower. The hot water eased the stiffness in his aching muscles. The work had been grueling when he was 21. Now, at 43, it was wearing him down fast, but Dennis, Brian, and Paul didn't seem to care. With John's ongoing medical bills draining the company's budget, they insisted there was no money for extra help. Wiping the steam from the mirror, Ronnie barely glanced at his reflection. Still broad-shouldered, still strong, but worn down in ways that didn't show on the surface. He pulled on a t-shirt and shorts, then headed downstairs just as Charlotte set his plate in front of his usual seat. "And for dessert, there's hot apple pie," she said, sliding a frosted mug and a can of beer next to his plate. A sick feeling settled in Ronnie's gut. The last time Charlotte had served him a beer in a frosted mug, they'd been sitting at the kitchen table, relaxed. It had been her 35th birthday, a few months before their 17th anniversary. Tracy was out with friends. Ronnie had been savoring the cold drink, content, until Charlotte broke the peace. "Sweetheart, we need to talk," she had said. The words that followed were a slow, meandering build-up to something she didn't quite know how to say. Ronnie had let her ramble for a while before cutting her off with a sigh. "Charlotte, just get to the point. My beer's almost gone." She scowled at him, then took a breath. "Darlene and Gary aren't exclusive." Ronnie frowned. "And they have an open marriage." His grip on the mug tightened. "And have you ever thought about sleeping with other women?" she asked. "Of course," Ronnie admitted. "I'm a man. I notice people. That girl Shelley at the gas station, for example." Charlotte scoffed. "Shelley at the gas station? Yeah, right. Like you'd ever have a shot with her." Ronnie smirked. "That's not the point. I see, I think, and then it stops there." "But what if it didn't have to stop?" she pressed. "What if we could have fun with other people and still come home to each other? No guilt, no secrets." "I can't," Ronnie said flatly. "We're married. We made vows in front of our families, our friends." He drained the last of his beer and stood, carrying his mug to the sink. "We promised to be faithful, to forsake all others, including Shelley at the gas station." Charlotte tilted her head. "But we could make new vows." "No," Ronnie said firmly. "The ones we have are good enough. Darlene and Gary might be fine with whatever they're doing, but that's not us. It never will be." "But no, end of discussion," he said, walking out of the kitchen. At least he had hoped it was the end. But Charlotte brought it up again, and again. Each time, Ronnie shut her down. "But honey," she whined, "this would prove how much we love each other. We'd trust each other enough to—" Ronnie groaned. "Do you even hear how ridiculous you sound?" "No, Charlotte. If you need me to let you cheat on me just to prove I love you, then maybe I don't. The fourth time she brought it up, Ronnie had had enough. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, John, how are you?" he said casually. Charlotte's face went pale. She knew exactly who he was talking to. But when he followed up with, "Can I speak to Lois?" her expression turned to horror. "Here, Charlotte," he said, holding the phone out to her. "Tell your mom what Darlene's been filling your head with." Charlotte snatched the phone, bolted from her seat. But before she could escape, Ronnie caught her by the shoulder, keeping her in place. Trapped, she stammered out a pathetic, jumbled explanation before abruptly hanging up. When she turned back to Ronnie, her face burned with rage. "You son of a witch!" she hissed. Ronnie leaned in close. "Listen to me, and listen well," he said coldly. "Bring this up again, and you won't have a marriage to open. We'll be done." And just like that, it stopped. Charlotte never mentioned it again. Darlene and Gary stopped showing up as often, their influence fading. Ronnie had won. "Ask Darlene to make you some," Ronnie said, rinsing out his cup. 5 years had passed since Charlotte last brought up the idea of an open marriage, and now, as Ronnie sat at the dinner table, he watched her pour him a beer. The foam threatened to spill over. Charlotte had never quite mastered the art of pouring. "You know, I turn 40 next Tuesday," she said, as Ronnie cut into his pork chop. "I know," he replied, chewing. "And when we met, I was a maiden," she continued. Ronnie raised an eyebrow. "Not sure what that has to do with your birthday, but all right. You're turning 40, and you were a maiden." Charlotte let out an exaggerated sigh. "What I mean is, I've only ever been with one man. Just you." "Well, lucky you, that man was me," Ronnie said, spearing a forkful of green beans. "Did you cook these with bacon? They're pretty good." "But you," she pressed. "You had, what, 10 women before me, maybe more?" Ronnie took a sip of his beer. "Life's not always fair." Charlotte leaned forward. "So I've been thinking, I've spent my whole life taking care of you, raising Tracy, looking after my parents. And now that I'm hitting the big 4-0, I deserve a little fun, a break." Ronnie slowed his chewing. "A break?" "Darlene and I are going to Las Vegas next week," she announced. "She found a great deal at one of the casinos." Ronnie took his time swallowing his bite. He picked up his beer, took another sip, then wiped his mouth with his napkin. "And while we're there," Charlotte continued, her voice a little too casual, "we might, go out, meet a couple of guys, just for a date, not necessarily anything serious. Just a little harmless fun so I can see what it's like to talk to someone new, so I can appreciate what I have at home even more." Ronnie tapped his fork against his plate. This sauce is almost perfect." "Ronnie, I'm serious," Charlotte snapped. "So am I," he said, still focused on his meal. "This is about me," she insisted. "I want to experience life, to spread my wings." "You mean cheat on me?" Ronnie asked. Charlotte stiffened. "Listen, I've already made my decision. Either you accept it or we get a divorce." Ronnie leaned back in his chair. "Okay, I'll file for divorce." He set his fork down and glanced at the dessert on the counter. "Do we have any ice cream to go with this pie?" Charlotte blinked. "Wait, what?" "Divorce is expensive, Ronnie," she protested. "You can't be serious." He shrugged. "What's there to talk about? You just sat here and told me you made up your mind. You and your delightful cousin are heading to Vegas. You don't care about our bills, our responsibilities. You're going because it's your big 4-0. You're a married woman planning to go on dates with other men, and you're telling me I either have to be okay with it or end our marriage? Fine, we're ending it. Now about that pie. Does it come with ice cream?" "But it's just for a week," Charlotte argued. "1 week, 1 night, 1 hour. It doesn't matter," Ronnie said, pushing his plate away. "Cheating is cheating, and I refuse to be married to a cheater, so no damn ice cream." "You could take Darlene," Charlotte suggested weakly. Ronnie burst into laughter. "Oh God, no, that's the worst idea you've ever had. I wouldn't touch Darlene if she were the last woman on earth." He cut into the pie, took a bite, then immediately grimaced. "Oh, fantastic. You used that artificial sweetener again, didn't you?" He pushed the plate away, stood up, wiped his mouth, and walked out of the kitchen. "Don't worry. Tomorrow, I'll meet with a lawyer and get the divorce started," he called over his shoulder as he headed upstairs. Charlotte gasped. "But, Ronnie—" "You don't listen!" he suddenly shouted from the stairwell, turning back. "Of course I listen," she yelled. Ronnie stormed back down. "No, you don't. I told you what would happen if you ever brought this up again. And here we are. So, we're getting a divorce. He marched into the third bedroom, which served as their home office, and turned on the old desktop computer. The thing was ancient, 7 years outdated, but still connected to the internet. He typed in a quick search for local divorce attorneys. Penny Barnes, family law, free consultation. Perfect. He clicked the link and filled out the online form. A moment later, his phone buzzed with a confirmation. Appointment scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Charlotte busied herself in the kitchen, muttering angrily as she cleaned up. Later, when she came upstairs, she undressed and slid into bed, without clothes. Ronnie wasn't surprised when she pressed herself against him. "No thanks," he said, rolling over. "Good night." Ronnie woke at his usual time, 5:30 a.m. Even on his days off, his body was stuck in its routine. He slipped out of bed quietly, not bothering to look back at Charlotte, and closed the bedroom door behind him. Downstairs, he brewed a pot of coffee and checked his emails. Penny Barnes's office had sent a list of documents he needed to bring. By 7 o'clock, he debated making himself a second cup when he heard Charlotte stomping around upstairs. He decided against making her one. If she wanted coffee, she could brew it herself. Then he heard her voice. No, I told him. He has to let me. She was whispering into her phone as she descended the stairs. Then she spotted him. She jumped and gasped. "Ronnie, what are you doing here?" He sipped his coffee. "Like I told you last night, Dennis doesn't have clearance to start the federal savings and loan rebuild yet, so I've got nothing to do today." Charlotte pressed her lips together. "And right now," he added, "the grass is too wet to mow, so I'm just reading the news. Did you know Burns & Burns is thinking of opening a second store? Right there in Pulaski." Charlotte huffed. "You could have at least left me some coffee." Ronnie shrugged. "Ask Darlene to make you some?" He rinsed out his cup and walked away. Penny Barnes was an attractive brunette, the kind of woman who exuded quiet confidence. Ronnie had a sneaking suspicion her glasses were more of an accessory than a necessity, something to make her appear more authoritative. She skimmed through the financial paperwork, tapping a manicured nail against the page. "Looks like you refinanced your mortgage at 3.9% recently?" Ronnie nodded. "Yeah, my daughter's in her final year of college. My father-in-law racked up a mountain of medical expenses, and my mother-in-law's insurance barely covered anything. The deductibles were insane. Then came funeral costs. And on top of all that, Eccles renovation nearly went under after Paul botched the timing on several project orders." Penny clicked her tongue. "Yeah, I see that here." She glanced up, adjusting her glasses. "So, Mr. Jackson, divorcing the boss's daughter? How's that going to affect your job?" Ronnie chuckled. "I think I'll be stepping away from the company." She nodded. "Makes sense. On the other hand, Mrs. Jackson's job at the Garland County Public Library shouldn't be affected." By Friday, Dennis still hadn't received the green light for the federal savings and loan rebuild, leaving Ronnie with extra time at home to work on some lingering repairs. That's when Charlotte called. The second he answered, she erupted. "What the hell is this? What kind of scam are you pulling?" "Ah, so you got the paperwork," Ronnie said, his tone casual. "Anyway, what's wrong with the downstairs bathroom? You mentioned something needing fixing, but I'm not seeing the problem." "The lock is sticking," Charlotte snapped. "And you and I need to talk when I get home. You hear me?" "No, Charlotte. We've talked plenty, but talking doesn't help when you listen to Darlene more than your own husband. So no, we're done talking." Ronnie jiggled the bathroom lock, testing it. "Yeah, I see the problem. I'll take care of it. Bye." "But I don't want a divorce," Charlotte whined. "And I don't want to be married to someone who's got one foot out the door," Ronnie shot back. "Anything else?" Silence. Then a grudging, "No." "Great. Goodbye then." He let the next call go to voicemail, but when John's name popped up on the screen, he sighed and answered. "Hello." John grumbled, growled, and wheezed, his typical way of speaking since the stroke. Ronnie listened, deciphering a string of slurred expletives. "It's simple, sir. Darlene and her husband have an open marriage, and they convinced Charlotte that she should too. She figured she could have her fun on the side while staying married to me, and, well, I told her no." John's response was a mix of sputtered outrage and half-intelligible ranting. "Last night," Ronnie continued, "your daughter told me I could either accept it or get a divorce, so I'm choosing divorce." John tried to argue, shifting to guilt-tripping tactics. "Look, I appreciate the concern," Ronnie said, though he didn't mean it. "But you've got 3 sons and a daughter. This is between Charlotte and me. John muttered something else, but Ronnie sighed, already done with the conversation. Besides, why would I want a company that's been drowning in debt for the past 3 years? He muttered under his breath. Charlotte didn't come home alone that evening. As expected, she brought backup Darlene and Gary, her ever-supportive, ever-meddling cheerleaders. Ronnie leaned back in his chair, watching them set up their performance. Look, Ronnie, Gary began, adopting a patronizing tone. Since our marriage isn't threatened by outside connections, Darlene is free to form relationships beyond just me. Darlene nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, it's about trust, you know. We share everything, no secrets. It's actually brought us closer. Charlotte shot Ronnie a hopeful look, as if their nonsense might finally sway him. Ronnie nodded thoughtfully. Oh, well, that certainly explains everything. The trio's faces lit up. Then Ronnie stood up. No! Their expressions fell. But, hey, Charlotte, he added with a grin, after we're divorced, you'll be free to open your heart, your life, and whatever else to anyone you want. Gary smirked. Oh, I see how it is. Just because you feel insecure, you think Charlotte should deny herself new experiences? Ronnie flashed his teeth in a mock-friendly grin. If telling yourself that helps you sleep at night, then by all means, go right ahead. With that, he turned and headed upstairs. That night, Charlotte made one final, desperate attempt to sway him by pressing herself against him in bed. Ronnie didn't even look at her. Get some sleep, Charlotte. You've got a busy day ahead. As always, Ronnie's body woke him at 5:30 a.m. He no longer cared if the noise of his morning routine disturbed Charlotte. She could sleep through it or not. It wasn't his problem. Anymore, Dot. He went downstairs, brewed himself a cup of coffee, and scrolled through the latest news. His usual irritation at the political headlines surfaced. These politicians, I swear, he muttered to himself. Force them to live on Social Security. Make them use the same damn healthcare system they shoved down everyone else's throat. At 11 a.m., a knock sounded at the front door. Gary. Ronnie opened it, immediately blocking Gary's attempt to step inside. Yeah? Ronnie asked. Hey, man, Gary said with forced enthusiasm. I'm here to pick up Charlotte, take her to the airport. Ronnie didn't move. I'll let her know you're here. He then shut the door in Gary's face and returned to his pre-recorded sitcom. A few minutes later, Charlotte came stomping down the stairs, dragging her suitcase behind her. She shot Ronnie an exasperated look. Why didn't you tell me Gary and Darlene were waiting? Huh? Ronnie finally glanced at her. Oh yeah, they're outside. Charlotte rolled her eyes. God, really? Do you have to act like this? She set her suitcase down and leaned toward him, expecting a kiss. Ronnie leaned away. Her lips met empty air. We'll talk about this when I get back, she huffed. No, we won't, he said, eyes back on the TV. We really won't. Once Charlotte left, Ronnie enjoyed a peaceful afternoon. After a good meal, he tackled some lingering projects, finishing the last of his home improvements by repainting the front door. He went with a pale yellow, something that stood out against the red brick of the house. The fresh color brightened the entryway, making the place feel lighter. From the garage, their cat, Samson, yowled in protest. Ronnie smirked. Relax, buddy. Soon as the door's dry, I'll let you out. For the first time in a long while, Ronnie felt like something in his life was finally being fixed. Back upstairs, Ronnie sat down at the computer and got to work severing financial ties. First, he logged into their shared accounts and canceled every joint credit card. He had no idea if Charlotte had personal cards in her own name, nor did he care. What mattered was that he wasn't about to bankroll her little Vegas escapade or her cousin's reckless spending habits. Next, he withdrew half the funds from Charlotte's personal account. Then, from their joint account, where he had been the only contributor, he withdrew half of that as well. Setting up a new private account in his name was surprisingly easy, and within minutes he had transferred his share of the money there. His next move was cutting his name from the household bills. Most companies made it easy to make changes online. Garland County Power and Light sent a confirmation email stating the cancellation wouldn't take effect until the end of the billing cycle. I don't give a damn, Ronnie muttered at the screen. As his stomach rumbled, he decided it was time to treat himself. Sloan's Pizza, he said aloud, grinning. Charlotte had never let him eat there, always nagging about cholesterol and heart disease. Well, maybe he'd drop dead from a heart attack right there in the booth. Worth it. He ordered a large pizza and a cold draft beer. The waitress, though easily 75 pounds overweight, had a warm smile, and Ronnie found himself casually flirting. She laughed and tapped his wedding ring with one of her ridiculously long nails. That killed the mood. He glanced at his left hand, his good mood fading. When he got to his truck, he yanked at the ring for what felt like forever before it finally slipped off. He tossed it into the cup holder, then looked at his bare hand. "Forever, huh, Charlotte?" he muttered. "Guess forever ended today." His truck made a soft, familiar groan. Low fuel. He pulled into a gas station, initially intending to pump just $10 worth, but then shrugged and filled the whole damn tank. 22 gallons takes forever, huh? He muttered to the pump as it gurgled. Inside, he grabbed a six-pack of boudoir beer. As he walked past the freezers, he spotted tubs of ice cream and tossed a pint of strawberry into his basket. Shelley wasn't working the register anymore. She had married and crushed the dreams of half the men who used to swing by just to see her. But Shannon Carlisle, the tiny brunette who had taken her place, was almost as pretty. Ronnie smiled as she hopped up onto the milk crate she kept behind the counter. Once, he had asked how tall she was. She had given him a sharp look and snapped, "I'm 4'8". How short are you?" About 7 inches, he had joked. Her brown eyes had widened, then she burst out laughing. From that day on, she called him Shorty. "Has your wife left town, Shorty?" Shannon asked, ringing up his beer and ice cream. "My wife left for good," Ronnie said. Her dark brown eyes flickered to his bare ring finger. She studied him for a moment, then smirked. "So, sweetheart, where are you taking me on our first date?" she teased, casually running a hand through her thick brown hair. Ronnie chuckled. "Shannon, as pretty as you are, what in the world do you want with an old man like me?" She grinned. About 7 inches." Charlotte had turned 40 on Tuesday. By Wednesday, Tracy called. "Eccles renovation and remodeling," Ronnie answered. "Dad, it was Mom's birthday yesterday," Tracy said, her tone accusatory. Ronnie said, scratching his 3-day stubble. "And? Why didn't you call her?" "Didn't feel like it," he replied. "Dad, that's so immature." "Why?" "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "Your mother decided that turning 40 meant she should start sleeping with other men." There was a pause. Then, "And what?" Ronnie scoffed. "What do you mean? And what? She's a married woman. Married women don't sleep with other men." "Oh my God, Dad, that's so old-fashioned," Tracy giggled. "Goodbye, Tracy." Ronnie hung up. 10 minutes later, Charlotte's number flashed on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Eccles renovation and remodeling, Ronnie speaking." "Hi, Ronnie." Charlotte's voice was firm, clipped. "Hey, how does it feel to be a 40-year-old cheater?" Ronnie asked. "That's not funny," she snapped. "Didn't think so either," he said evenly. "Oh, and thanks so much for canceling the credit cards," she added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're welcome," Ronnie said. "Anything else?" "My birthday was yesterday, Ronnie," she said. "Why didn't you call?" "Didn't want to," he sighed. "But hey, maybe one of your new boyfriends gave you a birthday wish." "Oh my God, grow up, Ronnie." "Oh, already? Growing up means honoring commitments, keeping your word. Adults respect their vows, Charlotte." Charlotte exhaled sharply, then changed her approach. "So, Melissa Callick?" "Melissa Callick," Ronnie echoed. "Oh yeah. Used to be Melissa Strom. She was in Tracy's class. Cute blonde. Married that bank manager, Lucas Callick. Anyway, she's in real estate now, and I've got this adorable redhead handling our house listing. Damn, she's as cute as a button. The good news? She's confident she can sell the place fast." "Sell!" Charlotte shrieked. "Ronnie, we are not selling the house." "Oh? You really think you can afford to buy me out?" Ronnie asked casually. "Remember, we still have to pay off the second mortgage, and Melissa says we'll probably have to bring money to the table to get rid of it." "We're not selling the house," Charlotte yelled again. "And I went ahead and put all your furniture into storage at Easy Warehouse on Independence Road," Ronnie continued smoothly. "Unit 212. Your dad has the key." In the background, Ronnie heard Charlotte groan. "Oh, Darlene, I need to get home." "But since your dad couldn't take the cat, I dropped Samson off at Dennis's place," Ronnie added. "Dennis?" Charlotte shrieked. "My God, he has Dobermans." Ronnie grinned. "Huh, you're right. No wonder he was so eager to adopt the cat." "Ronnie!" Charlotte's screams pierced through the phone, but he was already done with the conversation. He hung up. And just like that, the last tie was cut. Leaving his phone on the kitchen table, Ronnie went upstairs and powered on his laptop. The phone started ringing again, but he ignored it. He muttered to himself as he navigated the internet. Maybe your mom's new boyfriend can cover your tuition, Tracy. Or, better yet, see if there's a scholarship for students with a 2.1 GPA. With that attitude, it's getting harder to justify why I should pay for it. After shutting down the computer, he headed to the bathroom, lathered his face, and shaved off 3 days' worth of stubble. It was rough going, but he managed without nicking himself. A hot shower followed, then a clean pair of jeans and a t-shirt. Downstairs, he grabbed his truck keys, stepped outside, and retrieved his laptop from behind the passenger seat. Then, with deliberate ease, he tossed his phone into the trash bin and rolled it to the curb. "I'm going to miss having you around," said his neighbor, Herman Vaugard, standing on his porch across the street. Ronnie smirked. "We've barely spoken. The only time we exchanged more than a sentence was when you complained about Tracy's friends blasting their music too loud." "Exactly," Herman grumbled. "Do you know how rare it is to get neighbors who don't borrow your tools, don't expect you to pet sit, and don't ask you to pick up their mail when they go on vacation? Now I'll probably get some couple who wants to host neighborhood barbecues." "Serves you right for being so approachable," Ronnie said. Herman glanced at the trash bin and raised an eyebrow. Your garbage is ringing." Ronnie smirked. "Probably a rat. Mind your own business." He shook Herman's hand one last time and walked back inside. Charlotte arrived home to find that her key no longer fit the front door. Frustrated, she whipped out her phone to call Gold Standard Real Estate, but the call wouldn't go through. "Darlene, let me see your phone," she snapped. As Charlotte fumed, Gary walked around the house, rattling the windows and testing the back door. No luck. Everything was locked up tight. Finally, Charlotte got through to the agency. "Gold Standard Real Estate, this is Melissa Kallick," came a chipper voice. Yes, this is Charlotte Jackson," Charlotte snapped. "I'm standing outside my house, and my key doesn't work." "Jackson?" "Oh, Ronald Jackson's ex-wife," Melissa asked, still chipper. Wife, Charlotte corrected. "Oh, I'm so glad you called. I actually need you to sign some paperwork. Also, you won't believe this, I have a couple who's really interested in your home." "The house is not for sale," Charlotte barked. "Oh? So, are you buying out Mr. Jackson's share then?" Melissa asked innocently. "That's too bad. The Richmonds were very eager. Well, I suppose they could look at the Purcell's listing instead." Charlotte clenched her jaw as Gary returned from his perimeter check. "The place is sealed up tight," he reported. Cursing under her breath, Charlotte called Ronnie. When his voicemail picked up, she seethed. "You son of a beep!" She groaned and leaned against the car. Gary sighed. "Look, do you want to ride somewhere, or are we going to camp out here all night?" Charlotte exhaled sharply. "Let's go get my cat." Charlotte called Dennis, the next logical stop. "Hey, Dennis, you have Samson?" "Are you out of your damn mind?" Dennis snapped. "You think I'd take in that useless cat when I have 3 Dobermans? Papillon, Olive Oil, and Bluto would tear it to pieces?" Charlotte's stomach dropped. "Then where is he?" "Dad has him," Dennis grumbled. "Better get there fast. His physical therapist is allergic to cats, and you know how Dad gets when someone inconveniences him." "Oh, thank God," Charlotte exhaled. "And thank you, Charlotte," Dennis added sarcastically. "Ronnie's gone, and now we're practically out of business. We finally got clearance for the federal savings and loan job, except I had to let Fremantle take it because none of us know how to lay tile." "Uh-huh," Charlotte mumbled, barely listening as she hung up. Darlene rolled her eyes. "How many more people are you going to call?" Charlotte shrugged. "What? You have unlimited minutes, right?" Darlene scoffed. "Yeah, except this genius over here wasted most of them on fantasy football." She nudged Gary, who grumbled but didn't argue. "Fine. Last call," Charlotte promised. John Eccles picked up and exploded the moment she said hello. By the time he finished ranting, she had no choice but to swallow her pride and ask if she could stay at his house. Reluctantly, John agreed. Gary pulled up to John's house, popped the trunk, and dumped Charlotte's suitcase onto the driveway. Darlene and Charlotte exchanged a quick hug before Charlotte dragged her luggage toward the front door. As Darlene climbed into the front seat, Gary smirked. "So, how was it?" Darlene sighed, exasperated. "What a nightmare. I mean, look at her. Does she really think anyone wants to sleep with her?" Gary snorted. "Not with you sitting next to her, that's for sure." They watched as Charlotte disappeared inside. "But did you at least get any money out of her?" Gary asked. "Almost," Darlene muttered. "If it weren't for Ronnie. God, I hate that guy. Can you believe he canceled all her credit cards? She had to use her debit card the whole time. Gary shrugged. So? There are ATMs everywhere. Darlene groaned. Yeah, well, she's got about $10 left. Gary rolled his eyes. Fine, I'll stop at a gas station. Just get $10, Darlene reminded him. We still got to pay the electric bill, unless you already paid it. Gary nodded, climbed out of the car, and walked into the convenience store. Darlene sighed, resting her forehead against the window. But then, through the glass, she saw Gary stop in front of the beer cooler. Her eyes narrowed. She slammed her palm against the horn. Gary! Gary flinched and turned to glare at her through the window, before casually reaching for a can of beer anyway. When he returned to the car, he held up the single can, looking innocent. I was only going to get one. Darlene rolled her eyes. Yeah, one, until you went back for 6 more. Hey, Gary grinned. Does that tiny chick still work here? The one with the, big assets? Darlene scoffed. Shannon, her bosoms aren't even big. They just look bigger because she's so damn short. Gary chuckled. I mean, I'm not complaining. Darlene scowled. Just fill the damn tank, Gary. While Darlene and Gary bickered in the car, Charlotte sat on the edge of her childhood bed, phone pressed to her ear as her father unleashed his fury. Since his stroke, John Eccles had abandoned any pretense of civility. Vulgarity had become his native tongue, and tonight he didn't hold back. Take a good look in the mirror, will you? John scoffed. You're built like a damn walrus, and that face of yours looks like somebody took a blowtorch to it and put the fire out with a rake. Charlotte flinched. Dad, you hit 40, so what? Women turn 40 every damn day, John snapped. But not all of them turn into complete morons just because of it. He jabbed a finger at the stack of legal documents sitting on the coffee table. Before Charlotte could respond, Samson, the only living creature in the house who didn't seem to despise her, strolled lazily into the room. And while you're at it, hire a damn lawyer. I need to clean out that cat's litter box, John muttered, cringing. God only knows what the hell that animal's been eating, but I swear to Christ, it smells like something died in there. He shoved himself away from the table, his left side drooping slightly, a thin thread of drool slipping from the corner of his mouth. Your room's still there, he grumbled, heading toward the kitchen. I hope it was worth it, you hear me? 40 years old and still as dumb as you were at 20. That night, Charlotte lay in her childhood bed, staring at the faded wallpaper she and her mother had picked out when she was 8. Samson curled up at her feet, completely unfazed by the mess her life had become. She sighed. Her 40th birthday week had started off so promising. The flight to Vegas had been smooth, the city lights breathtaking from the plane window. Excitement buzzed in her veins as she and Darlene checked into their hotel, then rushed downstairs to the roulette table. They giggled, placed a few small bets, and then decided to grab dinner. That's when everything unraveled. A handsome waiter returned to their table, expression unreadable. Ma'am, your card was declined, he said. Charlotte felt her stomach drop. She handed him another card. Declined. A third. By the time the restaurant manager personally returned her final card with a hard, unsympathetic stare, she was sweating. In a last desperate attempt, she pulled out her debit card and held her breath. Approved. Back in their hotel room, she pulled up her banking app and felt the blood drain from her face. Half of her money was gone. Both she and Darlene immediately blamed Ronnie. He's gone too far this time, Darlene hissed. Way too far, Charlotte agreed. Darlene, ever the optimist, tried to rally. Come on, girl, we're in Vegas. Don't let that a-hole ruin this for us. But watching Darlene blow $300 in under an hour at the blackjack table didn't exactly lift Charlotte's spirits, especially because it was Charlotte's $300. She tried to have fun. She even picked up a handsome 25-year-old at a bar. They ended up in her hotel room. It lasted 4 minutes. And then, Charlotte turned her head just in time to see David Daltrey rummaging through her purse. She kicked him out before he could grab her wallet. Darlene, meanwhile, had soured completely. She raged about being stuck on a budget, whining that she was only allowed to spend $100 a day. Lady Luck hadn't smiled at her once. Then came Charlotte's actual birthday. Tuesday night, she tried again. Another young man, another flirtatious laugh, another glimmer of hope. Then he leaned in, smirked, and said, Lady, if I wanted to sleep with a 300-pound woman, I'd be at home with my wife. But hey, I heard there's a blind convention 2 hotels over. Maybe you'll have better luck there, fat ass. Charlotte stood there, humiliated, as he walked away. She barely made it back to her room before the tears started. And of course, the Do Not Disturb sign was hanging from the doorknob. Darlene. Charlotte sighed and slumped into the hotel coffee shop. She sat there for 2 hours, stirring a black coffee she never drank. Finally, she texted Darlene that she was coming back. When she returned, the sign was gone. She showered, put on the hot lingerie she'd packed, and climbed into bed. And that's when it hit her. Ronnie hadn't called, not a text, not a voicemail, not even a sarcastic, happy birthday 40-year-old hooker. Even Tracy had only sent a brief text. Happy birthday, Mom? Ronnie? Nothing. Dennis, Brian, and Paul had sent her birthday wishes. But by morning, Darlene was already ranting about their tight budget. I paid for the flight. I paid for the hotel, Darlene snapped. And now we're broke because of you. By Saturday morning, Charlotte was done. She seriously considered cutting Darlene off completely. Blood relative or not, the woman was a parasite. But Darlene had both of their return tickets in her purse. So Charlotte kept her mouth shut. Now, lying in her old room, she let out a slow breath. Her big 4-0 had been a total, unforgivable disaster. Monday morning, Charlotte met with Jim Runkles, a no-nonsense attorney recommended by her boss at the library. Jim skimmed the paperwork from Penny Barnes's office, his face impassive. He gets half, you get half. The house must be sold, and the profits, if there are any, will be split down the middle. Any remaining mortgage debt will also be split. Charlotte swallowed. He's not asking for alimony, Jim continued, even though he's currently unemployed. But I don't want a divorce, Charlotte whined. I don't want to lose my home, Jim sighed, rubbing his temple. Mrs. Jackson, it doesn't matter what you want. If one person in a marriage wants a divorce, then guess what? They get a divorce. Charlotte perked up. Can we request a consultation? Jim raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Sure, I'll call Penny's office. Charlotte forced a smile as he made the call. But she barely listened. Instead, her eyes drifted over the titles on his bookshelf, tuning out the uh-huhs and hums. Jim hung up the phone and turned to Charlotte, folding his hands on the desk. Here's the problem, he said. Penny Barnes has no idea where her client is. Charlotte's stomach dropped. What? Jim's expression remained steady. Your husband came in, paid his fee, and left. The only contact information he provided was an email address. Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. Does she need it? It's the only way she can reach him, Jim replied. And no, she won't give it to us. Attorney-client privilege. Charlotte sank into the chair. Oh. Jim sighed and glanced at his notes. And one more thing. Ronnie told Miss Barnes that from now on your daughter can pay for her own tuition and dorm expenses. Charlotte's throat tightened. Jim frowned. He mentioned something about new traditions. Any idea what he meant? Charlotte's stomach churned. She shook her head. No. But she had a sinking feeling that Tracy did. Charlotte didn't celebrate her 41st birthday. She went about her morning as usual, dressed for work, grabbed her bag, and stopped by her father's chair to kiss his cheek. John didn't acknowledge her. He simply sat there, staring at his hands, which rested lifelessly in his lap. You need anything before I head out? She asked. Nope, he muttered. She forced a smile. All right then. You and Samson be good today. John scoffed. What the hell do you think we're going to do? Charlotte didn't bother responding. She drove the same route she had every morning for the past year, from her father's house to the library. Her phone rang as she pulled into the parking lot, but she waited until she'd parked before checking the message. Happy birthday. Charlotte sighed. Yes, Tracy, happy birthday to me. I'm just overflowing with joy. Still, she typed a quick reply thanking her daughter. Since her disastrous 40th birthday, Charlotte had managed to lose 25 pounds. Not that anyone noticed. No one had paid much attention to her since Ronnie left. It had taken less than a week after his departure for her to realize the ugly truth about Darlene and Gary's open marriage. It wasn't some enlightened, progressive relationship. It was just two miserable people who didn't love each other. But neither could afford to live alone, so they simply coexisted in a cramped, aging trailer. No affection, no warmth, no passion. Charlotte thought back to Ronnie, the way he used to hug her from behind while she cooked, the way he'd steal kisses when she made him pork chops and mashed potatoes. She used to pull away, scrunching her nose. He smelled like sweat, like labor, like a man who worked hard. And then, when she had announced she was going to Vegas without him, he had simply stopped hugging her altogether. The last time she saw him, she had leaned in for a kiss. He had moved away. An hour after reading Tracy's text, Charlotte's phone buzzed again. "Are you running late?" She blinked at the message from her manager. Snapping out of her daze, she got out of the car and walked toward the back entrance of the cinder-block building. Meanwhile, Tracy sat on her bed, rereading her mother's birthday text. Then she glanced at a second message, one that had arrived just minutes earlier. Attached was a photo of a tiny newborn baby girl with a full head of dark brown hair. Antoinette Barbara Jackson, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, 17 inches. The text came from her father's number. Tracy stared at the screen, stunned. Her baby sister was born on the same day as her mother. She let out a breathless, ironic chuckle. Oh, Mom's not going to like that. A thought crossed her mind. Did Dad even remember that today was her birthday? At carpets, tiles, hardwoods, and laminate flooring, a perky brunette at the front desk picked up the ringing phone. "Shannon Parker, Becky McMahon's office. How can I help?" She glanced up. "Hey, Shorty, line 3. Ronnie, in the middle of helping a young couple pick out hardwood flooring, signaled for Bobby East to take over. He stepped away, crossing the bustling trading floor toward the flashing extension. He had been expecting a call from Samuel D., who was negotiating a major flooring contract with a new housing developer. As Ronnie picked up the phone, a very familiar voice greeted him. "Well, you know what, Mr. Shorty?" He froze. Shannon sounded downright giddy. "Looks like you and your 7 inches managed to put another one in me." Ronnie nearly choked. "Wait, what?" She laughed. "Yep, Tony isn't even out of diapers yet, and I'm already knocked up again." Ronnie ran a hand through his hair. "Where are you right now?" "Just leaving Dr. Pruitt's office," she replied. "Then get that gorgeous A of yours over here," he said. "We're celebrating." Shannon giggled. "I think all this attention on my A is what got us into this mess in the first place." She pushed Tony's stroller across the parking lot, stepping into the blistering Texas heat. At 4'8", she was used to feeling dwarfed by the world around her. But she loved this place. She tilted her head back, smiling into the sun. When Ronnie left town, he had stopped by the gas station one last time. Shannon had been leaning against the counter, sipping a Diet Coke. "Where are you headed?" she had asked, hopping off her milk crate. Ronnie smirked. "Why do you want to know?" "So I can tell them where to forward my last paycheck." Ronnie raised an eyebrow. "You going somewhere warm?" Shannon continued. "Because I've had enough of this damn snow." Ronnie chuckled. "Shannon, what does a gorgeous girl like you want with an old man like me?" She opened her mouth, ready to fire off her usual response. "About 7 inches," but stopped. Instead, she studied him. "All right, big guy. What color are my eyes?" Ronnie didn't hesitate. "Brown. Really dark brown." She nodded. "I have a dimple. Which cheek?" "Left." She smiled. "And when you grin, your right canine is a little crooked. Not bad, just not perfectly straight." Shannon's smirk softened into something real. Stepping out from behind the counter, she reached for his left hand. "Hey, Paulie," she called toward the stockroom. A heavy-set man lumbered out. "What?" "I'm leaving," she announced, grabbing her purse. Paulie frowned. "But you still have 2 hours left on your shift." She coughed dramatically. "Cough, cough, I feel sick. Bye." Without waiting for a response, she turned back to Ronnie, a grin spreading across her face. "Hey, kid," she said. "You ever been to Texas?" Now, standing outside the Alliance Square Medical Center, Shannon whispered into her phone. "Hey, Ronnie." His voice came through immediately. "Yeah, babe." She hesitated for just a moment, then said softly, "I love you." Across town, Ronnie smiled as the trading floor bustled around him. "I love you too, Shorty." Charlotte sat at the kitchen table in her father's house, stirring a cup of lukewarm coffee, her thoughts a tangled mess of regret, resentment, and resignation. A year had passed since her 40th birthday disaster, and every time she looked at her reflection, she saw a woman she barely recognized, a woman who had thrown away everything without realizing its worth. Ronnie, on the other hand, had moved forward effortlessly. Word had reached her through Tracy. Her ex-husband had remarried. Shannon, the short brunette from the gas station, was now Mrs. Jackson, and they had a baby together. Another one on the way, too. The finality of it all stung more than she had expected. Tracy had come home for a weekend visit, bringing photos of her baby sister, Antoinette. Charlotte had stared at the pictures, at the tiny, dark-haired infant wrapped in a soft pink blanket, and felt something twist inside her chest. The fact that the baby shared her birthday was almost poetic. Ronnie had replaced her in every possible way. Charlotte sighed and reached for her phone, scrolling absently through old text messages. She hesitated for a moment before typing out a message to Ronnie. "I'm sorry." She stared at the words for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, she deleted them. There was no point. Some things were beyond repair. Outside, her father coughed loudly in the living room, muttering curses at the television. The house smelled of old books, stale coffee, and forgotten dreams. Charlotte pushed away from the table, stood up, and went to clean Samson's litter box. It was the only thing left to take care of.